Hello everyone. Today, let me introduce you Lee Killock, the Director of Global Programs at M4. He is really welcome here in UNE, and my name is Raúl Yavin Purata Davila. Today, we're going to talk about which is his own path about teaching everyone. He has spread a lot of knowledge by teaching educators how to do all of these experiences, the experience of being in Narrative 4. So, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, now let's dive into a series of questions that I will provide you. The first
Sure.
one is, how do you relate your teaching experience and your role as director at Global Programs with the mission of Narrative 4?
So how do I relate them? Well, it was never a conscious decision. So to me, to go from teaching to Narrative 4, these are things that happen in your life that when you look back, you have the added sort of, you have hindsight, right? So you can put some of these things together. But I was a teacher in Newtown in Connecticut, which is a public school. It's a high school. So I taught grades 11 and 12, which are the juniors and the seniors. And but to be honest, if you were to ask any one of my friends back in England when I was growing up, I was a terrible student. I was the worst student on the planet. I did not like high school. I was raised in an area that the school system was pretty rough. So I wasn't interested in school. So it's kind of an interesting path that got me to teaching in the first place. It was years later that I decided I want to be a teacher, and I said to myself, I want to be the sort of teacher that I never had when I was a kid in school. I wanted to be a teacher that cared, that told stories, that got to know students, that tried to get them excited about literature and learning. And so I've always been a people person. So it was never a conscious decision to be a teacher until one teacher in a classroom changed my life in New York City. We were just talking about New York. And this teacher she was wild. She would jump on tables and chairs, and she would teach literature, and she would bring in guest speakers that I'm not sure she was allowed to bring in the classroom. Very controversial subjects she would teach, and it was amazing. And I was like, wow, she really turned me on to teaching. And I was like, wow, I think I could do that. Why don't we have more teachers like that? So I got into teaching, and I think Narrative 4 became a natural progression. My classroom just got bigger when I joined Narrative 4.
I've been in some sessions of Narrative 4, and I think that are an incredible experience. I mean, you can be empathic and you can be yourself because no one is going to judge you. So I really appreciate it to be with us. And also, I think that teaching is really good for everyone. Teaching and to be teach.
Well, what story did you tell in you did a story exchange? You don't have to say the whole story, but what was your experience? What did you?
Well, my experience was pretty good because I talk about the time that I was abroad in the US, in New York, and I have experienced a lot in that place because I was with my friends, and they gave me like a little object. I don't remember the name of the object, but it was like a little cat, and this little cat that was a little item, it was used to remind me that I will be with them anywhere I go. So that's why I always use that little cat with myself.
Yeah.
So that's why I always bring them everywhere I go.
And as a student, how did you feel when you got to tell your own story to somebody else?
Honestly, I feel really comfortable. I feel proud of my story because I think that it's about it. It's something that makes you feel, I don't know how to explain it, but you feel really good about it. Like you can express your story. You can express your feelings, the feeling of that moment. and it was something that I really like
Yeah.
about that dynamic.
And I feel every student should have an experience like that, that they should be seen, they should be heard, they should have an opportunity to be validated in, and stories for me are the best way to do that. It's the easiest way to do that.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, other thing that I notice about this exchange is that you develop empathy by repeating the story of someone else, like if it were yours. So if it's yours, you will feel like more connected with the story. So by repeating the story, you make the connection with the other person that you're talking with. So it was something amazing. I mean, with this exchange of information, of stories, you can develop new connections, having new friends, and also you can meet them on Instagram or Facebook or whatever app that you use. So it was a really good experience.
Great. I'm so happy that you had that experience, and now you get to share it with other people, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
totally. Well, the second question is, what is the ultimate objective of Narrative 4? Do you envision the organization expanding its reach to connect with countries worldwide in the future?
I mean, the one of the things that Narrative 4 has always prided itself on is this ability to, first of all, create empathy between people through the telling of stories, right? And the other part of that is once you get to know something so personal about another person or a place, and you can dismantle some of the stereotypes that exist about people or a place, and you get people to walk towards each other. And if you can do that, people, the ultimate goal is compassion, is how do you get to go from story, the transformative power of storytelling, to some sort of positive action, right? So if you tell me a story from your life, and I get really interested in your place, your community, I'm far more likely to act compassionately on your behalf, or put some action in place where I can be immersed in your community or your culture or whatever. And that's the ultimate goal, is how do you go from stories to sort of civic engagement, right?
Yes.
Compassion is the ultimate goal.
Yeah, I recently watched one of the podcasts that you participated in, and I really like your idea of not being the center of the universe, or
Yeah.
I don't know how to say it, but it's something like that, I think.
I think it was President Obama that said what I heard him say. So I steal things from people, right? And one of the things he said was there's an empathy deficit in the world. And this was when he was the president. And he said that we have to dethrone ourselves. We have to take ourselves off the throne, right? And you have to put somebody else there for a minute. And if you can do that, you can change the world. You can change single narratives. You can change stereotypes. You build bridges towards people when you do that. Yeah. So I've always loved that he said that. I just stole it from him.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, the third question is, have you devised a plan to enhance the popularity of these activities in other countries? Because when I was doing my research, I just noticed that N4 needs to be more exposed to the world. So I think that if it's a possibility to have a plan, or if you're planning of do something with that, because I think that these ideas are amazing. But for example, here in Mexico, Latin America, or other countries, I think that we need more expose of these topics and of these organizations. So I don't know if you have
I
a
can
plan.
speak to that. Well, we can rewind before the pandemic, right? Because Narrative 4, when it was first born, was an organization where many of the story exchanges took place in person. You and I would sit physically in front of each other, and we would do our story exchange. And that was the initial phase 1 of Narrative 4, right? And when the global pandemic happened, we always had a vision that we would go virtual so that we could bring more people together. Because number one is if you're in a country or a place and you don't have any resources, right? Whether it's a computer or money, or you don't have the ability to travel and meet people from South Africa or from Ireland or wherever, or from Mexico, Tampico, what do you do? Are you denied those experiences, those global experiences that can really make you a more open-hearted and broad-minded person, right? So we decided that even before the pandemic that we were going to go virtual so that we can, at the click of a computer or a smartphone or something, you can connect kids from around the world instantly, right?
Yes.
And then the pandemic happened, so we got to fast forward quickly. We had to sort of, we had to change very quickly. We had to do our training online, our story exchanges online. But I can tell you this, that the people that join our story exchanges online have the same visceral experience, as if almost identical to as if we were in person. They still have a similar experience. So now we can go anywhere. All you need is somebody needs a phone, somebody needs a computer, a school or a community, and some data, right?
Yes.
And we'll connect you with somebody from around the world. And it's amazing. Like we have international exchanges all the time.
Well, in my experience, referring to that, I noticed that we have the same conversation in my group. So in my group, we were having this conversation of empathy and the same activities. So due to that, I noticed that everything that you are saying is totally true. I mean, you can be in virtual or you can be in person, and it's going to be the same. Because I noticed it when I was in the exchange, in the online exchange. I talked with some people from one university of the United States, and it was something really good. And also we have the same exchange of stories here in Tampico, so I can relate with that. I think that is practically the same. I think that the only difference is that maybe in person you can watch the objects or you can watch people face to face, and it's amazing. But totally, I agree with that. I think that it's like practically the same.
I mean, there's nothing about the physical or organic experience of two people or a group of people sitting in a circle. There's nothing that can replace that, right? Because I can see every body movement. When you tell a story, the way you tell a story, the way your hands move, the way your foot, your knee moves, whatever, I see it all, right? On Zoom, you only see this. But you can learn a lot from somebody's expression, even on Zoom, right? Or, whatever, Google Hangouts, whatever you do. You can learn an awful lot about people, and the thing is, our experience with our method is still very visceral and personal. You feel it in the body, because you still have to tell that person, even though they're a screen, you still have to carry their story, and you have to tell it the best you can. And there's a lot of responsibility in that, right?
Exactly.
So it doesn't matter if it's online, you still have to have that responsibility. You're still taking it on and being physical with the story.
I have other question. How do you recommend us to have an active listening? Because it's something that is a struggle for a lot of people.
Yeah. Do you want to hear a crazy statistic, some data? I've been doing a lot of study on deep listening, and the average person, if you talk to somebody for 1 minute, the average person listens for 17 seconds at a time. You actually listen for about 17 seconds, and then your mind drifts and you look at this and you think of that, or while they're talking. That's terrible statistic. We all do it, right? Some of us are better listeners than others, but the thing about active listening is that you have to listen to understand somebody else's perspective. You cannot listen to respond straight away. So I always tell myself, if I talk to people, I tell myself, I'm like, Lee, don't respond, just listen, just be present. you know, and if I find myself drifting. In schools, what do you learn in schools? You learn reading. They teach how to read, and they give you all the stages of reading. They teach you how to writing, right?
Yes.
And they teach you all the stages. Where in schools do they teach listening? And that's at the root of everything, is the ability to listen, even when you're hearing your teacher or the teacher's listening to you in the classroom. So it needs to be taught in schools as a practice, and it's a practice. You have to practice. Otherwise, you know, you fall victim to your own, you know, non-listening. We have fun with it too. We have a lot of little lesson plans that we do to get people to listen. And the story exchange is an exercise in deep listening, right?
Right. And also, I think that other thing that can be really useful for being a good listener is to be using mindfulness. I don't know if, have you ever heard of it?
Yeah.
But I really like mindfulness, because mindfulness is to stay in the present. And I think that is related with these activities, because if you're present, you're going to be able to understand what your partner is saying. So
Yeah.
I don't know what you think about it.
Well, I've like I said, I've read lots of studies on listening, and a lot of the evaluation and the data that comes back will tell you that people who feel like they've been listened to, right? Because it's an amazing thing when somebody listens to you, right? Really listens without responding, just listens. That it's actually the same as feeling like love. It's akin. Deep listening, to be listened to, is akin to feeling loved, right? And they've done studies on this. They've done neuroscience. They've tested. They put these crazy helmets on people and tested the brain waves, and it's almost the same as feeling like you have been loved. So,
Well, continuing with the questions, I'm talking about the studies.
Yeah.
Recently, I have read some studies about Yale and Harvard that prove that, like, this type of conversations are really good to improve our confidence and our autoesteem. But how these activities are going to help people who had suffered the consequences of the pandemic? Do you think that it's going to help them in some way?
I mean, the pandemic was terrible for everyone, but the one positive thing, if there's anything, so I have to be careful how I phrase this, but the one positive thing that came out of the pandemic, that everybody in the planet, in the world, now has a similar experience. And now we have a starting point, and we can always talk about a shared experience that we've had. So whenever somebody says, oh, you know, I don't have anything in common with this person, I don't know anyone in Tampico, I have nothing in common with anyone from, you can say, yeah, you do. I went through a pandemic, you went through a pandemic, let's start there. So there's a starting point. So in that respect, it's good. But for mental health, it was terrible, right? Because there was an epidemic of loneliness and isolation. And I read a study by Vivek Murthy, who is the Surgeon General in America. And he's actually the only Surgeon General who's been under two presidents. He was over under President Obama, and now he's back with President Biden. But he, because he's the Surgeon General, he's looking at all of the top health concerns, right? And it could be, you know, cancer, obesity, diabetes, smoking, you know, whatever, right? All of these things that lead to health. And he said he went on his first year in office, he went on a listening tour, right, around America. And he just listened to people, and he said at the root of all health concerns, mostly, right, is loneliness. And that causes so many other things that have extra health concerns for people, right? So he just released a report. You should read it. It's fascinating. So there was an epidemic of loneliness, and that causes mental health, that causes other things. People, you know, felt so isolated, suicide rates went up, you know, drinking, alcohol, all of these other things that were a result. So one of the things that Narrative 4 did was we went virtual, and we had hundreds of people join our story exchanges every day. That's all we did, from all over the world too, from all over the world. There was a deep desire to connect, with people, right? Because we were so isolated. So yeah, so it's not just a feel-good thing. It actually has health benefits. You know, there's actually crucial health benefits that come from this sort of anything that brings people in community. So,
And I think that Narrative Fort had a really good experience with all of this, because Narrative Fort boosts all of these things to combat loneliness. So it's amazing.
yeah.
Um,
And the
for-
studies from, yeah, you mentioned Yale University, and Yale, when I was in the first couple of years that Narrative 4 was an organization, we joined a coalition of people. So it was the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, it was Narrative 4, there was Facebook at the time, and Lady Gaga.
Oh, really?
And the Born This Way Foundation, yeah. So they dreamed up this thing. It was called the Emotion Revolution. And Lady Gaga, who was terribly bullied when she was a kid in school, she wanted to bring this notion that our emotions matter, how we regulate our emotions matter, and especially in high schools and middle schools across the world, every school. But so we joined, and we sent a survey to you know, thousands and thousands of kids. Every single demographic was represented. If you know, regardless of your sexual identity, your economics, your, you know, what color, what faith, what religion, you know, it didn't matter. Everybody was represented in this. And they did a national study, and they asked questions. But the two main questions were, how do you feel in school? And how do you want to feel in school? Now, there's a big gulf between that. How do you feel and how do you want to feel, right? And about 80% of the emotions that students wrote about were negative. I feel bored, I feel stressed, I feel unseen, I feel anxious, you know, all of these sort of negative emotions. And one thing, they tagged kids that had done, students that had done the Narrative 4 program in schools. And our students fell far higher on the national average for positive emotions and far lower for negative emotions. Now, that was a Yale study. We just sent the study out to our schools, right? So I didn't write the report, but that's the evidence that came back. So it's not just this feel-good kumbaya thing. It has real value for the sciences behind it. There is science behind it, you know?
Totally.
So let's get every kid seen, heard, and validated, right?
I think that if you're feeling happy and validated, even if you are in whichever country, you're going to be happy with yourself, and you will avoid illness, you will avoid mental problems, because as you were saying, I think that it's really important to have these considerations, to be happy, because if you're happy, everything in your body is going to work well.
Sure. Stress is a killer, right? It can really
Yeah.
be detrimental. I also want to talk, because we're talking about health and we're talking about a lot of stuff, but also stories are really fun. It's about joy, right? I never went into stories because I was thinking about my health, my heart, my head, my lungs. You know, I was like, I just went into stories because they're fun. And I want to hear what you have to say, and you want to hear something I have to say, and oh my God, these are great stories. That's why you do it. You can laugh, you can cry, you can be embarrassed, you can have a lot of, it's about bringing joy back into life as well. And stories are the quickest way to do that, in my opinion.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. But I think that with this, we finished the question section. So the conclusion is that Narrative 4 is for creating a global community where young people learn and lead with curiosity, deep listening, and imagination. Thanks to Mr. Lee Keelock, the Director of Global Programs, and for all the current staff from Narrative 4, we're able to have these conversations in our country, and we're continuing developing our skills. Thank you so much for being here with us, and we are really proud of being with yourself.
It's my pleasure. I'm glad that you're a school that's going to take this sort of work seriously, because it's a muscle and you got to flex it, and you got to include the social emotional with the academic, you know,
Yeah.
and that's what brings a healthy environment to any school. And yeah, That's
Yeah, I totally agree.
thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you.